My name is Tessa Morland. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 7 years I've quietly built a health tech startup from the ground up, without headlines, applause, or any encouragement from the family, who never quite knew what to do with me. Tonight I sat at my brother's engagement party in Santa Barbara, California. Another wine-soaked evening meant to celebrate his latest accomplishment. The Morlands have always been polished, proper, and predictably impressive. My brother Davis is a neurologist. My parents are Stanford alumni with resumes built on elite boardrooms and Ivy League panels. And me? I was the deviation, the outlier. The daughter they smiled at politely and talked about in half sentences. That was, until Davis's fiancée Elise looked across the long oak table and said, "Wait, Morland? Are you Tessa Morland, as in the founder of NovaPath?" Utensils paused mid-air. A hush swept over the table like a sudden draft. My mother's brow furrowed. My father's jaw twitched. Davis looked confused. I simply smiled. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. Long overdue and completely irrelevant to the quiet work I'd already done. Growing up in our household meant deviation was failure. Success was a straight line. Medicine, law, finance. My father, Alan Morland, ran one of the largest medical ethics firms in the state. My mother, Janine, was a high-powered biotech executive who could dismantle a boardroom with 3 words. And Davis? He walked the path they drew, one achievement after another. Family dinners were showcases, his research grants, his perfect GPA, his published work. Then came the ritual. And you, Tessa? I built a prototype that could triage ER intake in under 2 minutes, I'd say. My mom would sip her Chardonnay and hum, "That's interesting, honey, but have you considered regulatory law?" What they called realistic, I called limiting. What they admired, I escaped. I needed freedom, not formulas, vision, not validation. At 16, I developed a triage interface for our local clinic's fundraiser. The coordinator told my mom I was gifted. She smiled and replied, "Yes, well, we're hoping she'll grow into something steady, like administration." That word, steady, it still makes me wince. As if ambition outside their blueprint was something brittle, easily dismissed. I remember slipping a printout of my early triage algorithm under my father's Wall Street Journal one morning, hoping he'd glance at it, maybe ask what it meant. He didn't, just nudged it aside to reach for his espresso. That quiet dismissal cut deeper than if he'd laughed outright. When Davis got accepted into medical school, they threw a catered celebration. That same week, I'd qualified for the California State Tech Expo finals. My mother smiled and said, "Maybe next time, Tess. Everything's already arranged for Davis's announcement." Went alone, and I won. I came home with a trophy clutched in both hands. No one asked how it went. They were busy passing champagne and printing invitations for Davis's Johns Hopkins send-off. I set the trophy in my closet, not as a symbol of victory, but of truth. Of who I was, even if no one else wanted to see it. That night, I made a silent vow. I would stop chasing their approval. I'd build a life so solid, so visible, it would no longer require their validation. College was my first breath of freedom. I chose a no-name but elite coding institute in Oregon, far from Santa Barbara, and farther from the Morland name. There, I wasn't Davis's sister. I was Tessa, the one who turned data into stories, systems into solutions. In sophomore year, I met Lena Chen. Lena was brilliant and restless, always challenging norms. We bonded fast, 2 women with chips on our shoulders and fire in our veins. Late nights were spent in her off-campus garage debugging code with cold Thai takeout and borrowed routers. We weren't building for grades, we were building because we had to. NovaPath began on a scrap of graph paper, an encrypted, intuitive interface to fix communication gaps in hospitals. Lena's uncle died from a prescription mix-up. My grandmother was misdiagnosed 3 times in a single year. We didn't just believe the system was broken, we knew. While our peers networked at career fairs, we were filing for an LLC using prize money from a regional pitch contest. Her family cheered us on, Mine still assumed I was temping in IT. I let them. It hurt less than explaining a dream they couldn't even begin to picture. I still remember the month we couldn't make rent in our tiny South Loop apartment. Instead of panicking, Lena suggested we build our landlord a new website in exchange for a 1-month extension. He agreed, somewhat amused. It bought us time. Time to code. Time to dream. Bit by bit, NovaPath began to grow. We pitched to small angel investors in makeshift conference rooms. We brought on Elise, a back-end wizard who'd dropped out of Caltech. Then came our first deal, with a mid-size regional health network in Indiana. And another. And another. Each new win arrived with disbelief and wonder. We were building something real, something that saved time, prevented errors, made care smoother. But I never told my family. Not even when we passed 100,000 users, not when we secured $3,200,000 0 cents in our Series A round. They never asked. By then, Davis had become chief resident at UCLA. My parents' Christmas newsletter still referred to me as Tessa, who's exploring freelance tech work in Chicago. I let it stand, not out of bitterness but protection. What Lena and I were building was too sacred to expose to people who once labeled it a distraction. But success doesn't need a spotlight to make noise. It hums. It expands. By the time I turned 30, NovaPath was valued at over $85 million 0 cents. We had contracts with 130 hospitals, a full staff, real HR, and a waiting list that stretched into the next fiscal year. We declined 3 acquisition offers already. We weren't done. Then one morning a message hit my inbox from a name that made me freeze. Harper Chen, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Horizon Health Systems. She wanted a meeting to explore a potential mission alignment. I read it twice, then searched her. Harper Chen Morland was Davis's fiancée. I told no one, not Lena, not our advisor, not even Jules, who knew everything else. For a week, I sat with it. The woman marrying my brother was trying to acquire the company I'd built in silence. She hadn't made the connection yet, of course. I'd always stayed off the radar. No press photos, no panels, just a first name and a few journal blurbs. But the engagement dinner was approaching fast. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. If you've ever stayed quiet while building something powerful, just to let the results speak louder than the noise, then this story is for you. Don't miss what happens when Harper finally connects the dots. Subscribe to the channel now so you're the first to see how everything unfolds at the engagement dinner. Harper's family is accomplished. We want to present well. Translation: don't embarrass us with your usual practical wardrobe. Of course, I replied. I'll wear something elegant. I chose a black dress, sleek, minimal, structured. Not flashy, not submissive, just quietly powerful. Not to impress anyone, just to feel like myself. I didn't need armor anymore. I was the armor. The restaurant was a gleaming tower of glass and modernism. Riverton-on-Lake, the newest Michelin-starred darling in downtown Chicago, perched right above the waterline. I arrived precisely on time. Not early enough to fuss with name cards, not late enough to be dramatic. Just present. Davis greeted me with his usual warm confidence. "Tess, glad you made it." He gestured toward a tall, poised woman at his side. "This is Harper." She extended a manicured hand. Her smile was graceful, her gaze steady. Exactly the type of woman my mother always hoped I'd emulate. Articulate, stylish, visibly accomplished. "Congratulations," I said warmly, shaking her hand. She smiled back, unaware. At least, for now. Dinner started with champagne flutes and scripted compliments. My father's toast highlighted Davis's recent publication on cognitive neurology. My mother dabbed tears while reminiscing about his first science fair. No one mentioned me. I was seated beside a cousin who leaned over and asked, "Still bouncing between gigs?" "I'm in health tech," I answered. "Oh," she said, tilting her head, "like an app?" "Something like that. Between courses," and Uncle chimed in. "Davis said you might get an interview with Apple? Entry level, but still solid." I smiled, non-committal. That won't be necessary. From across the table, I caught Harper studying me. Really studying me. Like someone flipping through mental files. Her brow furrowed. She tilted her head. Tessa Morland, she said aloud. Wait. Morland? Davis laughed. Yeah, she's my sister. Harper's eyes widened. She slowly set her fork down. You're Tessa Morland, from NovaPath? The air crystallized. Forks paused. Even the waitstaff seemed to stall mid-step. I am, I replied calmly. You're the founder? Of NovaPath? My mother's expression faltered, her smile frozen in place. My father stopped mid-sip. Harper turned to Davis, her voice full of disbelief. You never told me your sister built NovaPath. The company we're about to acquire, Harper said slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. Davis blinked. I'm sorry, what? Tessa? No, you must be confused. My sister works in tech support or something. No, Harper interrupted, her voice clear and firm. Your sister is the co-founder and CEO of the most advanced healthcare communications platform on the market. We've been in discussions with her company for the past 6 weeks. The current valuation, over $200 million. 0 cents. The silence that followed was absolute. One by one, heads turned toward me. My mother's hand moved to her necklace like it could anchor her. My father's confident posture sagged just slightly, like he was suddenly seeing me for the first time and wasn't sure what to make of it. Davis stared at me, eyes wide. Is that true? He whispered. Yes, I said evenly. We started NovaPath in a garage. We now serve over 300 hospitals nationwide. No one spoke. Not even Harper, who now looked at me with a complicated blend of apology and admiration. The rest of the dinner passed in fragments. Aunt Karen asked if I had stock tips. A cousin who once mocked my career path leaned in, all curiosity and fake warmth. My mother, who once told me to aim for law school, mentioned 3 times that she always knew I had a flair for innovation. My father claimed he'd told colleagues about my tech project years ago. I let them say whatever they needed to say. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't need to. Davis, though, he stayed quiet. The shock hadn't worn off. He picked up his wine glass, missed it, and just sat there with his hand resting flat on the linen, as though he'd forgotten how to move. After dessert, Harper approached me near the floor-to-ceiling windows. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to out you like that. I shook my head. You didn't. That moment was always going to come. Well, she added, her voice soft. You built something that's saving lives. Our team talks about NovaPath constantly. Now I know why they're so protective. You built more than a product. You built trust. I nodded. Thank you. And I meant it. That night, I walked to my car without looking back. They finally saw me, but the truth was, I had become everything I needed to be long before they noticed. We need to talk. Brunch tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the Waldron Hotel. That was my mother's message. My father's came 2 minutes later. Proud of you, let's catch up. Davis's text didn't arrive until nearly midnight. It was brief. Why didn't you tell me? I stared at that one the longest. Why hadn't I told them? Because I didn't want to need their recognition. Because I wasn't sure which would hurt more, being dismissed again, or finally being acknowledged, but only after I'd already built everything on my own. Still, I agreed to brunch. Some things needed to be said. They were already seated when I arrived at the Waldron's restaurant in River North. My mother wore pearls and a crisp silk blouse. My father had on his most formal sport coat. They looked less like parents and more like partners attending a board meeting. Like my success suddenly required a shift in tone. Tessa, my father said, rising awkwardly. He half hugged me with unfamiliar stiffness. You look well, my mother added, eyes scanning me like an annual report. She didn't wait. I've been reading everything. The awards, the funding rounds, the growth. It's all impressive. She paused. But Why didn't you share any of this with us? I folded the napkin on my lap. Because the last time I tried, you suggested I apply for a front desk job. That's not fair, my father said, bristling. We were trying to help. No, I replied evenly. You were trying to fix something that wasn't broken. My mother's smile faltered. We didn't understand. The tech space. It felt risky, unstable. And medicine doesn't? I asked gently. Law doesn't? That's different. Those are structured. I nodded. Exactly. That's what scared you. I chose something you couldn't control. My father exhaled. But you're clearly brilliant, Tessa. We always knew. No, I said, voice soft but steady. You knew what you wanted me to be. That's not the same. The waiter arrived with coffee, offering us a moment to regroup. I stirred in cream, collecting myself. I spent years building something I loved, I said, and every time I tried to share it, it felt like shouting into wind. Eventually, I just stopped. We thought you were lost, my mother whispered. I wasn't, I said. I just wasn't yours to direct anymore. The silence that followed was thin, like glass, but it held. We love you, she said. I know, I replied, but love without respect doesn't feel like love. For a moment, my father looked genuinely unsure, like a man who had built a life on being right and was suddenly wondering if, somewhere along the way, he'd gotten something terribly wrong. The rest of brunch passed more gently, less posturing, more listening. They asked real questions about Lena, about the garage in Portland where it all started, about our first nerve-wracking pitch to a regional hospital. My mother even admitted she'd read an article on startup culture, but couldn't understand half the acronyms. It was the most unguarded she'd been in years. We never meant to make you feel small, my father said softly as we reached for the check. You didn't mean to, I replied, but you did. And I had to learn how to grow around that. He nodded slowly. I'm glad you did, even if it wasn't with us. When we left the Waldron, there were no dramatic hugs, no movie-worthy reconciliation. Just a plan to meet again for dinner next week. It was something. A few days later, Davis showed up at my apartment with a bottle of Cabernet and a bakery box. I tried baking, he said sheepishly. It went badly. These are Plan B. I laughed. Classic you. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, the skyline shimmering through the windows. I need to say this, he began, without preamble. I'm sorry. I turned toward him, surprised. I thought you were floundering. I bought into their version of success. I never even asked. You weren't the only one, I said, but you're the only one here now. He raised his glass. To the black sheep. I raised mine to the sheep that built an empire. 6 months later, the Horizon deal closed. NovaPath became part of a global tech portfolio. Lena led global strategy. I stepped into the role of head of innovation. My office overlooked the Chicago River, but that wasn't the real change. The real change was my mother texting me articles, my father attending demos, and Davis quoting me in grand rounds. The biggest change? Me, mentoring girls in STEM, telling them, you don't need permission to matter. Build anyway. Believe first. Because recognition fades. But conviction, that stays. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or told your dreams were impractical, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your story, your journey, or simply your thoughts. Your support means more than you know, and if my story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel so we can keep building a space where quiet strength is celebrated.